Rohan, my voice is audible to you, right?
Yes, very much, Jagmohan.
ये पीटर बदमाशी कर रहा है, कहता है इसको सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है.
थोड़ा स्टार्टिंग में लो हो गया था. नहीं सर, ऐसा कुछ नहीं था. अपने अभी क्या बदमाशी करेंगे.
Just pulling your leg, Peter. Just pulling your leg.
Okay, so if all set, Rohan.
Rohan, my voice is audible to you.
Yes, very much.
ये पीटर बदमाशी कर रहा है, कहता है इसको सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है.
स्टार्टिंग में लो हो गया था. नहीं सर, ऐसा कुछ नहीं था.
Just pulling your leg, Peter. Just pulling your leg.
Okay, so if all set, Rohan.
Rohan, my voice is audible.
Yes, very much.
ये पीटर बदमाशी कर रहा है, कहता है सुनाई नहीं दे रहा है.
So if all set, then should we go ahead and have all the participants admitted?
Yes, please. I'm also just switching on my video. Just give me a second.
Yeah, actually I was getting twice the voice because I had made the session live also.
Huh.
I actually tried to fix that. Okay.
Yes.
So would request to share the screen and have all the participants admitted. This also have.
Rohan and I don't need to share any screen, right, Peter?
No. This I'm just having the team do that.
Sure. Rohan, you need to put more stuff on your YouTube channel now.
Sure, I will. I think now the pandemic is down, so I'm planning to record another video soon. So let's see when that happens.
Yeah, that last one you sent me was wonderful. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
A very warm welcome to all our participants. We are extremely sorry for the delay. We will begin with our today's session. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a lovely weekend afternoon and time to begin with our exciting series, a series of its kind, To the Point. Saying what you mean, being conscious and keeping it simple is what our today's session is all about. With the regular flow of webinars and online learning platforms during this pandemic, participants are also looking at content that makes a solid point and answers their queries straight away. To the Point is a short and direct style of information presentation. Thank you for joining HRAI, one more unique and futuristic series on To the Point, where our experts will be purely focusing on what our participants want and give them what they are here for. Request all our participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines flashed in the chat window. We are focused in having an effective session and your feedback will help us. We will be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all the participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for our today's session, Mr. Jagmohan Bhanver, CEO, Talgrow India. Mr. Bhanver is an entrepreneurial venture includes People First, Asia's leading OD and executive coaching firm, and IIFM. He has worked in leadership roles with Standard Chartered Bank, HDFC, and HSBC. He has coached CEOs and industry leaders across 3 continents and is among the first few masters coaches in Asia. He has written 6 best-selling books that are being translated into half a dozen languages. These includes Pichai, The Future of Google, Nadella, The Changing Face of Microsoft, and The Curse of Brahma. His thought leadership has been featured in publications like Forbes, Economic Times, Times of India, Silicon India, Z Business, Al Jazeera, and several other radio and TV shows. In his spare time, Mr. Banwar is passionate about traveling and penning Urdu poetries. You can follow him on LinkedIn. Details for the same have been shared in the chat window. Next, I welcome the moderator for our today's conversation, Mr. Rohan Lele, General Manager and Head L&D OD Employee Care Atul Limited. A people enthusiastic, leadership coach, trainer, and transformational leader who firmly believes in building a sustainable organization through constant innovation and adoption of the best people practices. Mr. Rohan has a master's in human resource management from MS University, where he bagged 4 gold medals and 2 scholarships. He has also completed certification in strategic HRM and leadership and change from IIM Ahmedabad and XLRI respectively. He is a certified leadership coach. He has worked with large Indian and multinational companies in India and abroad in the last 15 years. He has worked in various HR roles such as talent acquisition, learning and development, organizational development, talent management, employee relations, employee engagement, etc. He has led HR transformation projects in various HR assignments. He has received top honors and recognition during his stint with General Motors and Zydex Industries. He, has, he was awarded as 101 Super HR Achievers in the year 2019 by the World HRD Congress and CHRO Asia in 2019 and 101 Most Fabulous HR Tech Leaders by World HRD Congress and CHRO Asia in 2020. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. Details for the same have been shared in the chat window. I now hand over the platform to Mr. Rohan. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you, Peter. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Great. So, a very good afternoon to everyone. And thanks, HRI, for having me as a moderator for this session. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be moderating a session along with Jagmohan, who is a multifaceted personality. And I'm looking forward to a lot of learning through the session. And let me straight get to the point, right? That's what the session is all about. So I'm going to throw a few questions, and some of these are very straight, probably difficult, but I'm sure, given the kind of experience that Jagmohan has, it's going to be an immensely interesting and engaging session. So I have a whole bundle of questions, and I'm going to start with the first, which is to do with the ongoing pandemic, which started last year in the March 2020. The world has seen huge ups and downs in this pandemic, and it has been going on and on. It's been now more than a year that we've seen the first wave, the second wave, and now we are talking about the third wave. What do you think, Jagmohan, is the COVID crisis and opportunity for the shadow economy? That's the question.
Thanks. Thank you, Rowan. Before I respond to that question, let me just thank HRAI for organizing this and the audience for taking out time for this session. And Rowan, especially to you for moderating this session, because I don't know about the learnings you will take away. I'm sure there'll be a lot of learnings for me and the crowd here, also hearing from your perspective. So really happy to be here with you and with HRAI. To your question, look, there's always an opportunity and a challenge with everything in life, is what I believe. When we talk about the shadow economy, for people who may not be familiar with the term, shadow economy is nothing but it's the illegal economy which works parallel to your country's official economy, right? And that's there in most countries, and underdeveloped and developing nations perhaps a little more. because the informal working force is more. So think India, think Indonesia, think Brazil. The informal workforce is huge. In India, if you look at some of the statistics, almost 50% of our workforce, actually not 50%, the latest statistics that I saw were almost 90% of our workforce is in the informal workforce, right? And they're contributing more than 50% of our GDP. Now, if you look at it, it's huge. In terms of shadow economy, these are essentially all transactions which are happening below the radar, which means they're not captured from a tax perspective. So think government, we are not getting tax collections out there, right? Returns are not being filed. Now, all of that is happening. If you look at India, 15% of our GDP is contributed via the shadow economy. Now, to your question specifically, whether it's COVID or any epidemic or any significant unnatural situation, there is a positive correlation between that and the increase in the shadow economy. So the moment the incidence of COVID goes up, shadow economy prevalence also goes up. So for every 10% increase in the incidence of COVID, for instance, there would be approximately a 2% increase in the shadow economy growth. Now that's quite a lot if you look at it. Right? How does that impact all of us? Let's look at all the stakeholders. The government functions on tax collections to a large extent. Whatever is happening in the shadow economy is not getting collected. So the government's ability to use those funds in various initiatives, including the COVID situation, is going to be limited to that extent. Because there is unemployment, people are being compelled to move towards informal workforce, and a lot of that gets under the shadow economy. 3, the organized workforce is more regulated. So all this work from home situation, that's fine there. But in the informal workforce, how do you manage and control work from home? So with people going out, that also increases the incidence of the pandemic, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So to answer your question, to the point, directly related, and every increase in the pandemic incidences is going to result in an increase in the shadow economy.
Great, thank you. That's a very good perspective that you brought, and thanks for relating it with data as well. So friends, yes, there is a direct correlation between the COVID crisis and the shadow economy. So here's my next one, Jagmohan, and this is about leadership. Tell us 3 things that a leader should do to navigate successfully in a VUCA environment.
So when you talk about VUCA, Rohan, what we're really talking about is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. While some of us in corporate circles have been talking about it now for the last 8 or 9 years, the concept originated back in the US Army in 1987, if I'm not mistaken, or perhaps around 1988 or so. In fact, the gentleman who originated this also came up with another concept, which is very interesting, but because we don't have that much time, I'm not getting into it. If you were to look at VUCA, what are we talking about? We're talking about a situation, a state of flux. To manage any state of flux, you need preparedness. And preparedness not after the flux happens, but prior to the flux happening. So now, here's the contradiction. We are constantly in a state of flux, which means whether it's resilience, whether it's agility, whether it's adaptability, that needs to also be a continuously evolving process. Okay. So in a lot of forums, I've been asked, how do you manage VUCA in the time of COVID? The answer to that is you start managing it before COVID hit, because today it is COVID, tomorrow it could be anything else. That's the beauty about VUCA. We don't know what it's going to be. To your question, in terms of volatility, what's happening in volatility? Rapid changes are happening, right? Fluctuations are happening. So if you have to manage that, you need to build in an inherent adaptability within your organization, within your business, right? And you need to build in a lot of resilience and agility. Because when volatility is there, the first thing to happen is people end up giving up. And that's where resilience comes in. A lot of businesses have closed down, not because people did not have the resources to continue with those. Of course, that's true to a large extent, but even in cases where they had, I think resilience or the lack of it has played a role, right? We've seen that not with organizations alone, we've seen it with products as well. Okay, so what can a leader do there to manage volatility? I think have a certain buffer of agile leaders within the system. If you're a manufacturing business, well, carrying a little more inventory will help because it helps you tide over the fluctuations. In some cases, we also call it leadership buffer load, which means you have more leadership bandwidth than you need at a point in time because you never know when you might need it, right? In terms of uncertainty, I think, so what is uncertainty? Uncertainty is really about pending change, right? And there are unknowns, but they are known unknowns. And that's why we say it's uncertain. So I know a little bit about it, but I don't know what to do with it. That's where investing in information really helps. So building, as a leader, as an organization, building those systems where information is accessible within the organization. So not siloed, but easily accessible across all stakeholders. I think that's what leadership functions need to be focusing on there. In fact, I'm reminded of Bob Garrett's book, Building a Learning Organization, and half that book is all about how you can build shared knowledge bases, right? That goes a long way, and I've seen that across organizations, India, overseas, in addressing the uncertainty factor, which is the third one, complexity. So complexity is really nothing but having multiple variables, multiple interdependencies, right? Multiple key decision factors. How do you address that? The problem here is not that it's known or unknown. The problem with complexity is that there is just so much of it. There is so much of information out there. So many things that need to be addressed. Now, a lot of those things may not get managed internally. So while you might, as a leader, build internal SMEs, you would need to also build collaborations with external experts. Because for a lot of those dependencies, you might need specialized business partners externally to be able to bank upon. And the last one, of course, is ambiguity, which is really having too many unknown unknowns, right? So in my mind, that's actually way more difficult and challenging than uncertainty. There are unknowns, but unlike an uncertainty, they're unknown. So what do you do here? I think immersing yourself, if it's talking about ambiguity with customers, immersing yourself in the life of the customer, finding out what is it that they really want, what are the things which we don't know about them, right? Which we haven't even factored into, say, product development or tech process, getting to know that. So design thinking, I've noticed, helps a lot when you're looking at addressing ambiguity, and which is why design thinking for leaders has become such a big thing these days. So not 3 points, I know. I wanted to cover all the 4 aspects of VUCA, but I hope that addresses the question.
Oh, yes. In fact, just to add to design thinking, I think analytics, if used well, can play, again, a significant role to navigate successfully through VUCA. And I think the points that you mentioned, adaptability, agility, and resilience, I think something which is very, very important to navigate through any uncertainties. I think, and this holds true for uncertainties, complexities that one may have professionally in a corporate setup or one may have personally. Absolutely. So I think these 3 are the most important qualities. And the point that you said at the end, that was to collaborate. I think the history has it that no wars were won with individual brilliance, however good that one warrior was. So, at the end of the day, it's all about collaboration, where we support each other. Not only you collaborate with your internal customers, but also with your external customers. And that's absolutely a great thought. Thank you, Jagmohan, for sharing this.
Thanks, Rohan.
Coming to the third one, and this I believe is less talked about, most underrated, but in my opinion, the most important, and that is we hardly talk about empathy and listening with intent. I want to know your thoughts as a leader. How important is this to navigate, especially through these kind of uncertain times? Over to you.
So you're right. I mean, they've talked about a lot. I've also seen some organizations practice that a lot, and that's heartening to see that. But if your questioning is how important is empathy and listening, look, there really cannot be empathy without listening, right? I think as leaders, sometimes we fall in the authority trap. And I know in one of my books, I've called it the God image the leader has of himself or herself. Just because somebody is coming to us for help, it doesn't mean that they want us to help them solve their problem. What it really means is they want us to help them to figure out how they can themselves solve their problem a lot of times, right? Empathy is about getting to understand what they're going through, how it impacts them, and really feeling it in here the way they feel it, right? You cannot do that without actively listening, without being, totally keyed into what the other person is saying. So I think it's important. What could leaders do? Refrain from providing solutions. I think people are smart enough to figure out the solutions 90% of the time. A lot of times, all they want is you to listen to them. They want a shoulder. And if they have some blind spots, they want you to facilitate them so that they can figure out what those blind spots are. And at times you do nothing of this. At times you just sit there and listen, and that's good enough. And that really is empathy. Sometimes I have sat with people, or I've seen leaders sit with people where they've just said, hey, look, I understand what you're going through. And I can imagine how difficult this must be for you. And, well, I can think of 2 things I could do for you. Tell me, what is it that I can do? And that is good enough. People aren't really looking for more. There are exceptions, but generally that's good enough. And I think empathy is a core of any good leader.
Sure. I think that's a very wonderful point you've made, that you cannot have empathy if you're not a good listener. I think that's one key takeaway for all of us, that the first and the foremost is we need to develop listening skills. Listening is a very, very important aspect of communication, the most underrated and the most unspoken, to be honest. When we talk about communication, we hardly talk about listening as a skill. And I think very well said and very well connected that listening is an important underrider for empathy. So for you to show empathy, it's important that you listen well to people. I think wonderful point made. Thank you. In the earlier question, you spoke about agility and resilience, right? So the question here is, as a leader, how do you develop agile and resilient leadership? So what are those 2 or 3 things a leader should do to imbibe these 2 qualities?
That's an interesting question. Seeking your permission to share a little perspective before responding to that, and it'll take about 2 minutes. So a lot of times we try and build agile and resilient leadership, but that's a myth. If you just try to approach this part, which is, okay, how do I build agile and resilient leadership? It's doomed to fail. You need to look at agile and resilient leadership in the context of how agile the organization itself is. Is there an agile culture? Are there agile business solutions? Is there agile strategy? Is there agile governance? Within all of this sits your agile leadership. Okay, and that's what I meant when I said looking at it per se may not be the best approach. Now, coming to your actual question, if we have to build agile and resilient leadership, I think there are a few capabilities that one might want to focus on. So as a leader, I would say, okay, what are these capabilities? One, I want to look at integrity. And integrity, not the way we usually understand it, but more in terms of self-awareness. So as a leader, am I self-aware, right? Am I accountable? Am I willing to take ownership? So for me, that's integrity. The other part I would look at is, I would say, innovation, right? How curious am I? How experimental am I? If those factors are taken care of, that's the second capability that I would want to build for my agility and resilience. The third is decisiveness. And when I say decisiveness, what I'm really talking about is how focused am I? Okay, what is it that I want to do? Why do I want to do this? Am I resilient enough to do this? That is also a part of being decisive. And the third part is, do I have a sense of urgency? Right. So we've spoken about integrity, we've spoken about decisiveness, we've spoken about innovative. The fourth one is engaged. When I say as a leader, how am I engaged? What I'm really talking about is how inclusive and collaborative am I? Because without being inclusive and collaborative, you cannot build agile and resilient leadership, right? And the last part would be direction. So am I able to provide the requisite direction and vision to my team, to the other employees who are there, who depend on me? Because if I'm not able to do it, if my communication is not aligned with that, I will not have a motivated workforce. In fact, they will not be focused. So these are the 5 capabilities: integrity, innovative, decisive, engaged, and direction. These are the 5 capabilities I think we would want to look at building. From an organizational perspective, Rohan, that means that you would want to have a developmental approach which kind of uses layers of interventions to help your leaders get there. It could include mentoring. I've seen mentoring working beautifully. You get an external consultants to do that, and then you institutionalize it within your org. Sure. Coaching and focused leadership interventions. So broadly, that's my take on that.
Well said. Absolutely agree on that, Jagmohan. And you yourself are a business leader. You've led teams in the past. You're leading teams currently. Tell me 3 things that you have done as a leader to navigate through these uncertain times, especially the COVID times. And maybe if you can share an instance or an example, that will help.
I'm not sure I'm the best example because I've screwed up so many times, but sure. I mean, if you want me to use that, I'll do that. So we are in the talent space, right, Rohan? Our traditional business was more offline, okay? Executive coaching, leadership development, mentoring, and so on, OD interventions. Now, imagine last year when this stuff happened, all the clients on a roll were suddenly thinking, what would they do? And for us, that meant an instant dip in our business. And by dip, I meant it went to 0, right? Nothing was happening. So here are some of the things that we did. 1, we observed what's happening around us. B, we oriented ourselves. So, okay, this is what's happening. What does it mean for us? So we tried to draw meaning, relevance of what was happening in our context, right? I'm trying to put it in a process,
Sure.
right? So we observed, we oriented ourselves towards that. Third, we said, okay, this means we need to pivot. Now, before pivoting, because that would have required spending a lot of money rather than getting in money, we wanted to make sure we're on the right path. So we spoke to stakeholders internally, externally, just to make sure we're on the right track. And then we actually did the pivot. So in March 2020, we almost entirely moved our business from traditional to online. Our LMS, which was still not done yet at that time, we fast-tracked it. And by August, we were ready with the LMS. And this, by the way, is the first AI engineered LMS globally, but not the right forum to talk about. But we did that. Along with that, we said, okay, which stakeholders would this make more sense for? If not corporates, where are the other places we can go to? Mm-hmm. That's where education came in. So we started orienting the product towards that. So observe, orient, assess, pivot, look at a new target segment or identify the existing segment, position it to them, and then I think we spent a lot of time communicating with internal and external stakeholders. What's happening? There were a lot of things. We had recently hired a lot of people, and at that time we hadn't gone in for funding. It was bootstrapped. We were caught between a rock and a hard place. Rather than giving them false expectations, we bit the bullet. My senior leadership, along with me, had one-on-one conversations with the people that we knew we would not be able to retain. It was painful because being a startup, these are people you get very close to. They're like family. And telling them that you may not have a place for them any longer is the most painful thing I've gone through. But I've also noticed when you do it with conviction, when you do it, when you know that that's the only thing you can do to save the larger business and the larger, piece, and that you're being fair to them in parting as well, people accept it, and they accept it with grace. And fortunately, that happened for us. And I'm pretty sure that when we want these people to come back, we would be happy getting them back, and a lot of them would be happy to come back as well. So for us, I think those are some of the big things that happened. Today, if you look at it, our business is actually completely virtual. We've been doing virtual ADCs over the last few months. We've been doing virtual executive coachings. We've launched 3 new virtual programs. We launched the first people analytics program for managers in the country. We had Dave Ulrich as one of our lead faculties there, keynote. We had Dr. T.V. Rao, who's going to be a part of this. So associations with educational institutions and all. So these weren't even within the ambit of our radar.
Right.
Because we did what we did, suddenly the entire business model changed. And that's what I meant when I said agility cannot happen in isolation.
Absolutely.
It has to happen in the construct.
No, that reminds me of the motto of our school, from where I passed out. The motto of our school was a will find a way. That was the motto of our school. And what you just said, it speaks volumes about the willingness to move forward in spite of all the uncertainties. I mean, when we are faced with uncertainties, we always have 2 options. One is to constantly blame the circumstances and crib about it, and the other is to be curious, to be innovative, to have that zeal and enthusiasm to overcome it and succeed. And I think that's what it sums up, that you have to move on. Life has to go on. Today it is COVID, tomorrow it will be something else, day after it will be something else. We can't stop. And one thing that you very rightly said, and I loved it, is that while there was a lot of pain in parting with your team members, the intent behind it was right, and the intent was well communicated. I think this is something that business leaders must learn. And it's not about what you communicate, but it's also about how you communicate. And your intent, your good intent, should get captured in that how of communication. So thank you for putting it across so wonderfully.
Thank you.
And that brings me to my next question. You said that you had to take certain tough calls, and some people had to leave the organization, and this has happened all across industries, all across sectors, and it pains to see this. What people have gone through. What is that one message that you want to give to such people who have lost jobs in this pandemic? How can they deal with such uncertainties in future? How do they get themselves future ready?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rowan. That's such a great question. At the end of the day, you're talking about loss. Here we're talking about loss of a job, but anytime loss happens, what's the first thing that we go through? Shock, grief, depression, frustration, confusion, all of that stuff. You can either look at the loss as the ultimate thing that's happened to you, or you can say, okay, where do I move from here, right? That's more of a mindset thing. And I think that doesn't happen in a conversation. That's something that people need to be counseled on and then find it within themselves. But I'm saying the perspective is very important. That's one. The other is taking immediate stock of what you need to do. The first thing is personal, right? So, okay, what do my personal finances look like? How much do I have to go on? How many months leeway do I have? I think it's important to get into that. I know it's practical, but sometimes being practical is important, right?
Absolutely.
The other is looking at emotion, the emotional aspect. You are going to be devastated when you lose the job because so many insecurities come in. Was I not good enough? Was I not a priority for the organization versus somebody else, and so on. Self-talk, positive self-talk is very important. But remember, it's not just you, your family out there is also equally perturbed, but maybe they can't talk to you. So talking to them, talking to people who care about you, whether it's family or friends, is important. One, you get the elephant out there where everybody can see it. So it's no more a shadow in your mind and their minds. It's out, which means you can talk about it. Talking relaxes you. Not talking about it is very depressive, right? Fourth, at a professional level, looking at this as an opportunity that you have time and what are the skill sets that you can build. So it's like building a sigmoid curve for yourself. Okay, here is where my competencies are. What is it that I'm going to need tomorrow? Because tomorrow's future's workplace, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, can I build some skills in the interim? And these days you have so many MOOCs, a lot of information is free out there. Some might be paid courses. Well, and that's where you invest in yourself. So all of these things, both at a mindset level as well as building skills, and the kind of attitude that you bring to the table. I think all of that matters.
One very important point that you made here is about diversifying. I mean, just the way businesses diversify in order to cut the risk. I think as individuals, we also need to diversify in terms of our skill sets and in terms of our competence.
Yes.
If you are an HR professional, I'm just sharing an example here. Maybe you can look at HR analytics as an area to build your skill into, because that's the future. You can look at coaching as an area to venture into. So that basically have a plan B, because none of us know. I mean, when we were sitting in November about a year back, none of us knew that something like COVID is going to hit us. November 2019, none of us knew that a COVID like this thing is going to hit us all, and this is going to impact people globally, and so many people are going to lose lives, and so many people are going to lose jobs. I think that point you made about diversifying, having a plan B, is probably more pertinent, more important than ever before. So I completely agree on that. That brings me to my next question, and now I am going to ask for a piece of advice that you may have for the HR folks. How can HR in an organization, especially these times, there's a lot of depression around, people have lost jobs, or employees have seen their family members, close family members dying because of COVID. And this creates a lot of depression, gloominess around individuals. And this affects the mental well-being of people. And because it affects the mental well-being of people, it somewhere does affect your performance at work as well. All of this I see is all connected. How can HR and what can HR do to really uplift this whole mental well-being of the employees? Any advice from you on that?
Yeah, I don't know about advice, Rohan, but I can share a few thoughts, and also based on what I'm seeing organizations do as best practices. I think the first thing is to simply connect. And simply connecting is not just about talking to people, it's about communicating with them. And there's a lot of difference. A lot of us, including me at times, have talked with people going through these situations, but we've not really connected with them at an emotional level, at an empathic level. I think it's important to do that. And in that sense, therefore, it's not just human resources responsibility. It becomes the responsibility of the organization, even of the employees themselves, because each employee could also either be a manager or part of a team, which means what is it that all of us are doing collectively, right, to uplift each other. So one is that, simply connecting. So keeping communication channels open. So as an organization where I know that a limited number of people are going to be coming to office, everybody else is working from home, how do I keep my communication channels open? A lot of people have used official intranet, company intranet for that. There are some organizations which have very rapidly got external partners to build mobile apps for them. On those mobile apps, there's a whole lot of not just communication, there's community building happening, right? And communities, as we know, because we are all social creatures, that helps a lot. There are helplines over there on the app so that people can actually reach out to the other person. There are instances where people have not known that help is just maybe about a kilometer away from them, right? And that it might be somebody from their own organization. It just helps connect that better. So using technology, but using it for a very people-centric reason. So high touch and high tech both getting integrated there. I think that's important. The other is also trying to understand what our guys are going through. Half the time, our inability to communicate effectively with people when they're going through that situation is not because we can't do it, it's because we really don't understand what they're going through. And let's face it, unless you go through it yourself, how are you going to know what the other person is going through? And that's where empathy comes back again, right? So I think whether it's human resources or the organizations, setting up a process whereby people are able to interact more with each other. And that's going to be a big challenge for all of us, Rohan. Even when things open up, how are you going to address the collaboration aspect? You might get work done, but what happens to the collaboration? What happens to the personal connect? We will need to set up a process whereby that personal connect is established. And one of the ways of doing it is either through technology or technology-enabled engagement. And there's a lot one can talk about there. I'm not getting into details because of the time constraint, but that's the broad thought there. The other is, as an organization, articulate what is it that you can do and what is it that you cannot do for your people. I think it's very important to know both the things. And eventually following up on that, implementing it. There are well-being initiatives which organizations are taking. Some organizations have tied up with AOL, Art of Living. Some have tied up with other such bodies. And I think there's a lot of good work which everybody is doing there. In these times, mindfulness is very important. Some you might get it on your own. Some you might require the organizations to facilitate for you through various means and places. There are also organizations who've tied up with virtual healthcare providers. And there's some beautiful solutions out there, which I'd be happy to share, if that question comes up later. There are virtual healthcare situations, which means sitting at home, you can get at least 70% of the work done. You don't need to go to a doctor. If the organization can facilitate it, that's great. Some organizations in India, and I know of cases in the US, where they've actually tied up for therapy as well for their people, especially where people have gone into depression. And a lot of people are doing that. I think that also helps a lot. And for the employee to know that the organization is not averse to something like that is a huge boost also. Those are some of the things.
Right. So connect and communicate. I think very, very important, and leverage technology. I think that's the key takeaway. Why? Because in organizations, and especially when you have a diversified workforce across geographies, it's really impossible for you to maybe to have a one-on-one connect. So use technology. Today, AI has become a great enabler when it comes to connecting with people. So use and leverage technology is a very, very important point that you made here. And before we take more questions from the audience, here's my last question that I want to ask you. And this is about, there's this old saying, and very famous, which says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And a lot of people talk about the importance of culture, but at the same time, not many CEOs spend enough time they should be spending on developing the right culture in the organization. Your thoughts as to how much time should a CEO spend on developing the right culture versus defining or designing the right business strategy?
Simple answer to that. The CEO has no business defining strategy. You have your one downs to do that for you. And if you've chosen them well, they'll do a fantastic job of that. A CEO should spend maximum time on culture because without culture, there is no strategy. Culture always precedes strategy. In fact, at times, the culture will define the kind of strategy you will pick up, right? That's point number one. Point number two, what is culture? Culture is nothing but a collective set of behaviors, right, and beliefs that you have. That's how you want to run your business. Unless the organization knows that this is coming right from the top and this is the culture which the leader himself or herself is exemplifying, they're not going to be adopting that culture. So the third part is a lot of times we expect the culture to be something else, but the behaviors that we are recognizing and rewarding are entirely different. They have nothing to do with the culture that we're talking about. So even the behaviors that we recognize or reward or see should be aligned to the culture, which means the entire performance management needs to be reoriented. And I've seen a lot of organizations do that. Agile organizations do it beautifully because it's very culture based, but even traditional organizations today have started moving towards that. We work with a lot of manufacturing companies, which have actually started reshaping culture, albeit in pockets, because entire culture cannot be changed in a day or even a year, right?
Great point made. Let the CEO focus on the culture and leave it to your L-1s to work on the business strategy. Absolutely well said. Completely agree. There's a question which has come up, and we spoke about.
Rohan, before we take up.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, Rohan. So before we take up any further questions, we'll be running a poll so that we can capture the feedback of our participants. Would request all our participants to kindly share your feedback on our today's session. While you all are doing so, would request you all to share your questions pertaining to our today's session in the chat box. We would be happy to cover them. Yes, Rohan, you can take it.
Yeah, so this question, Jagmohan, that has been asked, is about, we just spoke about some mindfulness initiatives and mental well-being initiatives. The question is, do you believe that while HR and organizations are doing a lot in this space these days, do you believe that it is well perceived in our context? Because the moment we talk about mental health, right, it is still seen as a taboo. अरे मुझे क्या हुआ यार, मैं तो एकदम ओके हूँ यार. I mean, why do I need a mindfulness training?
Great question. The point is, Rohan, it's the same with everything. When we started executive coaching in India back in 2004, the question most CEOs and CXOs would ask the board is, why do I need coaching? Have I done something wrong? To a large extent, it also depends on how you're positioning it. You might be doing a wonderful thing for your employees, but if it's not positioned rightly, it'll send out the wrong message. So that entire positioning and communication around why mental health, why mindfulness, why, emotional equanimity and all, a lot depends on how it's being articulated. If the articulation is positive, people are not going to feel stressed out or anxious about being put into that. And if it's not properly done, well, then it doesn't serve any purpose. In any case, you are stressing them out further.
Right. Very important. I think the way, organizations need to spend some time and ensure that the intent behind such initiatives for mental well-being are rightfully communicated. The objective is well communicated. People are sensitized and people are told why this is important and how it is going to help them. Something that we talk about in marketing a lot, right? What is in it for me? So if that what is in it for me is communicated well, I think there is always acceptance and appreciation.
So, Rohan, these are changes, right? all of these things that we're talking about are changes. And if you were to look back at any change model, uh, take Adker for instance. I'm taking Adker instead of Kotter because Adker is more employee centric than Kotter in that sense. The basis is different. What does Adker start with? It starts with awareness, right? Awareness of why the change is happening.
Sure.
Building the desire within the concerned stakeholders that they should be a part of the change. Having the knowledge and the ability to do it. And the last part is reinforcing the success stories from the change process that is happening. If the organization's communication and implementation follows these 5 stages, it actually makes it much more easier. And I've seen organizations getting external stakeholders to do it as well. Because sometimes the organization might say the best of things, but employees might want to listen to the same thing from a neutral party or a third party. So when it comes to therapy, for instance, or mental health care, there are organizations that I know who've actually gotten external experts to talk about it in a very, very generic way, build incitement, curiosity, and then just let people know that, hey, if anybody wants to reach out to them, you can reach out either directly or through us. So there are ways of doing it.
Oh yes, I agree. There's a very interesting. While we talk about India being a labor surplus country, a talent surplus country, I've often seen people in HR and otherwise talking about there is a scarcity of talent. Now, I'm not sure how much the scarcity really is, or is it more of a hype that we've created around talent scarcity? But recently, CEO of a unicorn startup, he made a statement that I believe talent and education are 2 different things, and we should look at talent, and education is immaterial. And something very recent. I want to know your thoughts on this.
So that's a great question again. I'm reminded of 3 Idiots, the movie. It was an amazing movie. I personally watched it 5 times. But, it depends on what message you want to take out of it. Some people took out the message that, look, learning by rote is not important. Understanding stuff, being passionate about it is important, because when you're passionate, you will want to understand and then you will apply. Some people took the interpretation to be that, okay, studies aren't important. It's okay, you can do more with life and things will happen. But what people at times miss is the fact that unless as the education system builds in a lot of rigor, and a lot of times that rigor has been built in for the purpose of disciplining a mind rather, right? To be more focused. And it's not an either or situation. Talent alone is never going to achieve much unless it's backed by the tools to use that talent. And right. Education qualifications are just going to be hanging on my wall unless I have the talent to use those qualifications. So I think, like most things in life, it's a blend that we want to look at. Education qualifications for the purpose of furthering your talent, I think, is a great way to go. I know of many startup founders who've been able to start the company because of the talent and the passion, but have not been able to take it to fruition because the skills of growing the company were not there.
Sure.
And that's where they've gotten people with those right skills and the experience. Take Google, for instance. Sergey and Larry, when they started the company, they started it, but eventually Eric Schmidt had to be called in to grow the company for them. And when they had built the requisite capabilities, Eric Schmidt handed over the company to Larry, and then Larry ran the company for so many years before Pichai came in. So it's not either or. I think it's a mix of both, and if people are able to balance it, that's great.
And the matter of the fact is that, while you may be blessed, and I can give you an example of Kishore Kumar, right? A brilliant singer, never learned classical singing, but was blessed. But then he was extremely passionate to learn and improvise. And that's why he is one of the greats and arguably one of the best. Versus a Mohammad Rafi, who was a classically trained singer, right? And you can see the versatility that he brought to the table, from singing a bhajan to a cabaret to a romantic number to a sad number. So education will always have its importance in whatever field you choose. And if you back your education with a lot of passion, that's what will make you great eventually. So, well said that. And sometimes you are just blessed to be what you are. I mean, we've seen a lot of startups which have turned unicorn in the last 5 to 7 years. And none of these founders of these startups are IIMs or IITs, but they're still there. But then they've had the hunger to evolve, learn constantly, and reflect. That's what is important. And that's eventually what has made them great and where they've reached where they have. So I think great thought, Jagmohan. Peter, are there any more questions?
Yeah, I've shared a few questions that have come up. We have a couple of questions. There is one from Mr. Umesh and another one from Eugene. If you can take them up.
Sure.
Do you want me to put it across?
Yes. So yes, there's this question from Umesh. There are still significant examples of misalignment in leadership expectations, in driving culture versus managers imbibing the demonstrating the same on the ground. What are your thoughts on this, Jagmohan?
So let's take an example. You got a bunch of kids at home.
Yeah.
You keep telling them what they're doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You never tell them what they're doing right, because there is nothing to tell them, because they're already doing it right. So you're spending most of your time focusing on behaviors that are actually not desirable behaviors. What is the child getting out of this? The child is getting out of this that when I actually get the parents' attention, it's on these things, right? So the behaviors that actually get recognized in the child's mind are the negative behaviors, the undesirable behaviors. Similar stuff happens in organizations. Most leaders either don't provide feedback or don't provide feedback on what is happening well. They provide feedback on what is not happening well. So people actually are blind to what they're doing well. They cannot repeat those behaviors. They end up focusing more on what's not happening, because that gets them the attention. Secondly, if you are at the end of the year or every half year, you're gonna incentivize people on behaviors which have nothing to do with their culture, and that's the point I made earlier also. What you're really giving the message is, forget whatever the senior management is saying or what's written on the walls of the head office. Here are the things I'm gonna, foster. So take an example of, let's say, an organization where people are selling or mis-selling. But at the end of the day, they're getting huge incentives. Now, it doesn't matter whether your values say that, okay, you're not going to mis-sell or you're going to be maintaining integrity. The guy is saying at the end of the year, I get like 5 lakhs in increments and bonuses or commissions, and therefore it's great. So what you're actually furthering with your incent strategy is against your value system as an organization. And the answer, therefore, Umesh and others, would be that if you want certain behaviors to be reflected as part of your cultural, mirror, then you need to be very sure what behaviors you recognize and which are the ones where you give very proactive feedback on. Otherwise, the wrong examples are going to get.
Oh, yes, well said. And now I'll take the last question because we are nearing 4 o'clock. Last question for the day, which has come from one of our participants. And we talk about talent management a lot as an organization, as leaders, as HR. According to you, what should be the top priorities when it comes to managing talent? How should an organization go about it?
Actually, this can be answered in one line, and then if details are required, I'd be happy to provide. The talent management strategy needs to be aligned first and foremost to the organizational imperatives. That's where the starting point of any TM strategy should be. Link it with organizational imperatives. When you link it to organizational imperatives, the other part that would come automatically is, okay, are my people or is my people strategy aligned to delivering those organizational imperatives? So A, Do I have the right people? If not, then that gets blended into my talent acquisition strategy. Are my people engaged enough to deliver? That then gets into a different realm. Are my people adaptable to change to get those organizational imperatives? That gets into OD.
Yes.
And so on and so forth. So it starts with aligning it to your organizational imperatives and then mapping it to your people and saying, okay, what changes do I want on the people side?
Absolutely align it with your organizational objectives and imperatives. That's something that we need to do. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Peter, for this wonderful opportunity, and Jagmohan, brilliant. It was absolutely a pleasure hearing you, hearing all the insights. Very, very thoughtfully crafted and very well said, very well put, and I must say, to the point.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so much, Ron.
once again, HRAI. Thank you once again, Peter.
Amazing conversation. Thank you, Rohan, for taking us through this insightful session. Thank you, Mr. Jagmohan, for the brilliant response to the point with crisp and beautiful live examples. I see overwhelming response from our participants having all of their questions answered. To all those who wish to learn and grow, you can access the recordings of our today's session on our YouTube link shared in the chat window. Let us all thank the association members for supporting us and helping us reach out to all you passionate people. Geisha, NASCOM COE, GlipTalk, Talgrow, TLE, WICCI, LinkedIn Local, Ahmedabad, and India for supporting HRAI's event. Once again, on behalf of HRAI, want to thank Mr. Jagmohan and Mr. Rohan for such a wonderful session. We hope to see you soon again. Do join us for our next event, a masterclass series where we have 5 masters sharing their learnings and experience with us, starting with the first on the 21st of June by Miss Raina Khatri Tandon on the topic Posh in its true sense. Request you all to kindly register for this event and the link mentioned in the chat window. Till then, keep learning. See you soon. Stay safe. Take care and bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, HRAI, Rohan, audience. It was lovely being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Sham. We hereby conclude with our today's session.